Hello Pokemon trainers, welcome back to another Pokemon Scarlet and Violet video here on iStarly TV. Today we're going to talk about Battle Stadium singles, in particular the top 5 most used Paradox Pokemon in Battle Stadium singles right now. So Pokemon Home was recently updated to where, at least the mobile app, to where you can actually check the battle data for the current season of Battle Stadium. You can check, I believe, for singles and doubles, and as of the posting of this video, we can actually see every Pokemon's usage statistics in Battle Stadium singles, including their most common items, their most common moves, and even their most common Terra types. So this is extremely useful information if you play a lot of Battle Stadium singles like I do. So again, today we're talking about the top 5 most used Paradox Pokemon. Let's just get right into it. So the number 5 most used Paradox Pokemon in Battle Stadium singles is actually Iron Moth. So obviously we're gonna go from lowest to highest here, like a true countdown. So Iron Moth is a powerful special attacker with a massive special attack stat and really good speed and special defense. Its typing is really good offensively, and in some instances is also pretty good defensively. However, there are also cases where its typing is bad defensively. Of course, it is 4 times weak to ground, which is a really common type. However, it does 4 times resist Fairy, which is another really common type. So it's kind of like a give and take there. The most common moves on Iron Moth are Sludge Wave and Fiery Dance by far. Each of these moves has over 85% usage on Iron Moth, so almost every Iron Moth you see is going to have both of these moves. From there, the other commonly used moves are Energy Ball and Dazzling Gleam. Both of those have decently high usage as well. And then we look at moves like Overheat and Discharge, which are also decently commonly used. As far as items, the most common item for Iron Moth is Booster Energy, with a second place item being Choice Specs, which makes a lot of sense because it just boosts Iron Moth's already really high special attack stat. Finally, by far the most common Terra type that people are running on Iron Moth is Terra Grass. I think that's a pretty smart play for a lot of people. Obviously, once again, it is 4 times weak to ground, so if you change into a grass type, you now resist ground. And of course, it gives you a bonus, same type attack bonus on your energy balls. Of course, you're also weak to water by default, so turning into a grass type makes you resist that. The second most used Terra type is Fire, which also makes sense because it just gives you that added power to your Fire type move. So I could see something like a Terra Fire Choice Specs Overheat from Iron Moth doing a ton of damage. And you know what? I just gave myself an idea of a set that I want to try. So Iron Moth, number 5. The number 4 most used Paradox Pokemon in Battle Stadium singles right now is Iron Valiant. Iron Valiant, of course, is another really strong Pokemon with great stats. It's really fast, it's got a really high attack stat, and it also has a pretty solid special attack stat. So this can actually go as a mixed attacker. Offensively, it's really strong, although both of its typings are potentially awkward in the meta sometimes. Of course, being a fighting type, it struggles against defensive ghost types, and so a couple common Pokemon that give Iron Valiant trouble are going to be things like Skeledirge and Goldango, but with a booster energy getting a speed boost, Iron Valiant can threaten some of the more common Pokemon that you see in the meta, such as Roaring Moon, for example, and other dragon types. I think where Iron Valiant struggles is in its coverage. Now, looking at its moves, Close Combat is by far the most used move on Iron Valiant. From there, surprisingly, Destiny Bond is actually the second most used move, and actually I think that makes a lot of sense here because again, Iron Valiant's kind of like a glass cannon. It's really fast, it hits really hard, but it also takes a lot of damage from really strong Pokemon. So for anything that's going to outspeed it, you can use Destiny Bond and take them down with you. So I think that makes a lot of sense, and honestly, that's not something I thought too much of when I was building my own Iron Valiant sets. Spirit Break and Moonblast are almost tied for the 3rd and 4th most used moves on Iron Valiant. Spirit Break is on 44% of Iron Valiants, with Moonblast being on 41%, and Shadow Sneak being on 40%. So that rounds out the top 5 most used moves for Iron Valiant. and each of these makes a lot of sense. From there, we've got other moves like Encore, Knockoff, Aura Sphere, Shadow Ball, which also makes sense. Iron Valiant does have decent coverage, but it just feels like even though it has great coverage, you always want like your fighting type stab and then your fairy type stab, and it ends up kind of filling up your move slots really quickly. The most common item on Iron Valiant is actually Focus Sash, which is a little surprising as well. I thought it would have been Booster Energy. Booster Energy, of course, is number 2 though, with 34% of Iron Valiants using it. Focus Sash, I should say, is 48.8% of Iron Valiants. So almost half of the Iron Valiants you run into are going to be using a Focus Sash. And then we're looking at Terra types. Now, Iron Valiant has a decent balance of common Terra types. Apparently, Ghost is the most used at 28.7%, so almost 30%, almost a third of the Iron Valiants you run into are going to be Terra Ghost. Terra Fairy is a close second though at 23%, which makes a lot of sense because Fairy is just a great typing, gives you a bunch of bonus damage on your Moonblasts and or Spirit Breaks. And then finally there's Terra Steel, which is a common Terra type as well, and it rounds out Iron Valiant's defense really well. It's defensive typing really well. Personally, I've been using Terra Steel, but I would like to try some Terra Ghost, maybe with Terra Blast or Shadow Ball, to get off a lot of damage as well. I should also point out, it lists the top 10 most common Terra types, but I'm only going to name the ones that are, I think, more common for you to expect. So if you want to check the stats yourself, you can check on Pokemon Home, or also the website Pikalytics, which is another good one that also has this same data. Coming in at number 3, the number 3 most used Paradox Pokemon in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Battle Stadium Singles 2, that's a lot, that's a mouthful, is Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon is awesome. It's one of my favorites if you couldn't tell. It's so strong. Roaring Moon is the 3rd most used Paradox Pokemon, like I said, and it looks like the most common Roaring Moon set is going to be that Terra Flying Acrobatics set. So 58.3% of Roaring Moons are running Terra Flying, which means they're also running Acrobatics. And this is kind of a crazy little statistic. 75.5% of Roaring Moons are running Booster Energy as their item. So almost every single Roaring Moon you run into is going to be holding the Booster Energy item. I think that's crazy. Like, even the other Paradox Pokemon don't have that high usage on this item, but makes a lot of sense because Roaring Moon's already really strong. And so just making it even stronger is just wonderful. The most common move on Roaring Moon, however, is Dragon Dance, with 83.5% of Roaring Moons using it. That also makes a lot of sense. And then the 3rd and 4th most used moves on Roaring Moon are Earthquake with 43.9% and Throat Chop at 38%. I was a little surprised about that, to be quite honest. Personally, I've been using Crunch on my Roaring Moon just for the chance to lower the opponent's defense, but it looks like Throat Chop is by far the most commonly used Dark type move on Roaring Moon. And I guess that makes sense too. It stops people from using Yawn, from using Hyper Voice, from using Torch Song. There are a lot of sound-based moves right now that pretty common Pokemon are using that Roaring Moon can shut down just by simply using Throat Chop. So really strong Pokemon. And I guess I should also say the 2nd most used Terra type is Terra Steel at 19%. So by far and away, the most common Terra type on Roaring Moon is Flying. So that's Roaring Moon for you. Iron Bundle is the 2nd most used Paradox Pokemon in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Battle Stadium Singles 2. I've showcased Iron Bundle on a couple teams so far, and it's just a fantastic Pokemon. The most common item on it is Focus Sash at 35%. 2nd most common item is Booster Energy at 24%. And then a little surprisingly, the 3rd most common item at 16% is Choice Specs. Iron Bundle has a really high speed and special attack stat, so Choice Specs makes a lot of sense there, but what it really lacks is actually coverage. It really only has ice and water type moves as far as coverage goes, and then Terra Blast if you want to use that. But the most commonly used moves on Iron Bundle, almost every single Iron Bundle runs Freeze Dry. 96.5% of them are running Freeze Dry. Makes sense. This is an amazing move, has great spread. It hits almost everything for at least neutral damage, and then most things that it hits for not very effective damage, Hydro Pump can cover. With that being said, Hydro Pump is the second most used move at 91.8%, so just about 92%. And then Flip Turn is the third most used move at 60%. And then from there, this is a little surprising for me too, because I've been personally running Taunt on my iron bundles. 49.9%, 50% of iron bundles are running Encore. The fifth most used move is Ice Beam, and then there's the sixth most used move, which is Taunt, like I said. And finally, for Terra types, this is also a little surprising for me as well. The two most common Terra types on Iron Bundle are Terra Water and Terra Ice, in that order. Terra Water's 37.9% and Terra Ice is 34%. And so that's a little interesting to me. I thought that this is a Pokemon with pretty clear weaknesses, and so it makes a lot of sense to go for a defensive Terra, especially because changing your Terra type can give you Terra Blast as a coverage move, but it seems like a lot of people are just opting for extra damage on their water or ice type moves. Also, these two typings are like kind of decent defensively. Like for example, water is weak to electric, so if you Terra Ice, you remove that electric weakness. You know, ice is weak to fighting. If you Terra Water, you remove the fighting weakness. So I guess that makes a little bit of sense as well, but there's Iron Bundle, your second most used Paradox Pokemon in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and I do agree, this Pokemon's great. And I think a big reason for that is just that speed stat. Finally, drum roll please, the single most used Paradox Pokemon in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Series 2 so far is Brute Bonnet. No, I'm just kidding. Of course I'm kidding. It is Flutter Mane. You should know that if you've been playing a little bit. Flutter Mane is another one of my favorites. It just hits so hard. This thing is a nuke button. You click a move and few things can switch into you. This data does not tell us the most common like natures or EVs, but I would guess almost everyone is maxing out their special attack and speed and typically running either modest or timid. But either way, with that being said, the most commonly used move on Flutter Mane is Shadow Ball, with 95% of Flutter Manes using it. Makes a lot of sense. Ghost is an excellent type. Second is Moonblast at almost 90%. Then we have Mystical Fire at 75%, which also makes a lot of sense because it covers steel types really well. And then the fourth most used move I'm pleasantly surprised at is Psyshock, which is a move that I've been advocating for and that I've been using a lot myself, but that's only at 30%. So that's by far the most flexible and changeable move. From there, other people run things like Power Gem, Taunt, Thunderbolt, but if you're running Flutter Mane, you absolutely should be running Shadow Ball and Moonblast. They're just fantastic coverage moves together. And then the three most common items on Flutter Mane, the first two are almost tied. 32% of people are running Focus Sash. That makes a lot of sense. I think that's a great item for Flutter Mane. It's got amazing special attack, special defense, and speed, but its defense is actually really, really bad. So if you're up against a physical attacker, I could see how Focus Sash could be a great option. Then we've got Choice Specs, which is my favorite item on it. Just lets you hit super, super hard. And then there's Booster Energy at 22%, which is, I mean, that doesn't need any more explanation either. That's a great item. As for Terra types, the most common Terra type for Flutter Mane is Fairy at 40%. Then the second most common, by about half of that, is 21% of people are using Terra Normal, which makes a lot of sense because it removes the Ghost type weakness and gives you actually an immunity to it. So Normal and Ghost complement each other so well. Finally, the third most used Terra type is Terra Fire at 16.9%. About 17% of people are using Terra Fire. I love this Terra type as well. I think this is personally my favorite Terra type on Flutter Mane because it removes your Steel type weakness, which is huge, and it also gives you stab on your Mystical Fires. So good stuff here. So those are the top 5 most used Paradox Pokemon in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Just in case you're curious, I do believe the 6th most used Paradox Pokemon is Iron Hands. And again, it's still early enough in the month. We are actually only a week away from the release of this new rule set. So maybe by the end of the month, I'll do another video just to update and see if anything has changed. But at least right now, these are pretty firmly locked in place. And I completely understand these. I think if you had me guess who the top 5 most used Paradox Pokemon were, I might get some of the order wrong, but I probably would have guessed these 5. They're so good. So you should be using these yourself, and let me know in the comments which of these Paradox Pokemon is your favorite, and also which of these surprised you. Also, which Paradox Pokemon that's not in the top 10, or I'm sorry, top 5, do you think has a chance to rise up and knock one of them off? I do think there's a world where Iron Hands starts seeing more usage and maybe knocks something like Iron Moth down, but Iron Moth is also just so good. So thank you very much for watching. I hope this video helped you out. If it did, please leave a like and subscribe for more Pokemon Scarlet and Violet videos, and I'll see you next time.